X-Men 97. Like many nerds of my generation, the 1992 premiere of X-Men the Animated Series was a childhood-defining moment. I became immediately obsessed with the show, and I never missed an episode in the entirety of its 5-year run. So when Disney announced the X-Men 97 sequel series, I was just thrilled out of my mind. This was back in 2022. But as the quality of Marvel properties started dipping, I got a little nervous. Then when the series trailer finally dropped earlier this year, I filmed a reaction to it, and as I said in the reaction, I was not particularly impressed by what I saw. Now, the series is out, and I've watched the first 4 episodes, which is the episodes that have been released by the time we're filming this. By the time this comes out on YouTube, I don't know, maybe another episode or 2 may be released by then. But I gotta say, I have been pleasantly surprised by this show. The animation is much smoother than it appeared in the trailer, and the style strikes the perfect balance between retro and modern. It's also animated in widescreen, which gives it this nice cinematic quality to it. The first 3 episodes were inspired by the mid-80s run of the X-Men comics, and this is an era that we've never really seen adapted on the screen before, so it gives us something new on screen, which I really enjoy. And throughout the show, from the opening credits to the closing credits, there is so much fan service. I mean this in a good way. And so many callbacks and references to the original series that if you grew up with this like I did in the 90s, you're going to be delighted to see it. For me, though, the best way to watch this show is to not think of it as a direct continuation. And I'll explain why. When Wolverine and the X-Men, which was another animated iteration that came out in, I think it was like 2009, it was the end of the 2000s. I remember thinking, when that came out, you know what? It would be really cool if they used the original series as kind of the general backstory for this show, and then kind of did their own thing with it. And that's exactly what the makers have done with X-Men 97. It references big moments and displays all the trappings of the original series, but the makers aren't afraid to break continuity when it serves the plot line of the new show. And a few cases in point here. In the finale of the original series, Xavier survives this assassination attempt by a villain named Henry Gyrich. And he's dying. You think, oh, he's on his way out. And then Lilandra, who is Xavier's alien girlfriend, shows up. And she's like, well, I can save him, but I have to take him to my homeworld, the Shi'ar homeworld, and cure him. And everybody's sad because Xavier's gone, but he's not dead, and he's gonna be cured, presumably. But in X-Men 97, the X-Men repeatedly say Xavier's dead. Not that he's gone, but dead. And not only dead, but specifically he was assassinated by Gyrich, so the attempt succeeded. So this is like an alternate timeline. This isn't quite a continuation of the original series. Another example, there's a time traveler character named Bishop, who I love from the original show. And he's inexplicably trapped in the past. And it's like we're supposed to know why he's there. And all I can deduce is we're supposed to think that he's been there since the end of the season 4 finale. But if that's the case, he wasn't anywhere in season 5 of the original series. So that really doesn't make a whole lot of sense. There's also, in episode 3 of the original series, they establish that Xavier can defeat Magneto with telepathy through Magneto's helmet. Like, that helmet has nothing to do with blocking Xavier's telepathy like it does in the movies. But in this show, in episode 2, Magneto talks about how the helmet was he specifically wore that to prevent Xavier from using his telepathy, and now that Xavier's dead, he has no need of it. So that doesn't line up with the original. Another example, Rogue and Magneto are supposed to be have a romantic past that looks like it may be rekindled here, and there's no way you can watch the original series with those characters' relationships and their backstories and it make any sense that they ever had a romantic relationship. One more example, there's a character, his name is Forge. He's this mutant tech genius, and in the original show, he worked with the X-Men a couple of times. He never specifically met Storm, but in the 3rd episode of the new show, they meet each other, and he basically has to introduce himself and explain to her who he is. And for me, that just doesn't follow. I feel like in the original series, even if she never met him, she would have at least heard of him and known who he was. So it doesn't quite line up, but that's only a problem for continuity sticklers like me if we're watching this as a direct continuation and not giving the series room to kind of make its own backstory, like it's kind of an alternate universe type thing. I do have a few quibbles with the show, and I'll hit the biggest ones. The first episode, the X-Men seem to be way overpowered. They're using their powers in ways that we've never seen before, which significantly lowers the stakes in a fight. And I feel like the climactic battle of the first episode was specifically designed to top basically everything we ever saw in the original series, which was a little much for me. It kind of reminds me of how some of the DC movies have been treated, even the Marvel movies to a degree. There's also a tendency in the dialogue to tell instead of show, which flies in the face of optimal storytelling for visual media. And it's not just this show. This is something that I've noticed in film and television cropping up over the last couple of years. The art of subtlety and nuance in dialogue seems to kind of be lost or getting lost. And I'll give you an example in this show, X-Men 97. Episode 2, there's a scene where Magneto is at the UN. He's on trial for crimes against humanity, and he makes this big speech, and it is so heavy-handed. It's one notch below the character breaking the fourth wall and turning to the camera and saying, "Okay, listen up. This is the point we want you to get from this episode." It's just right there. There's also a level of cheesiness to some of the dialogue, which is another homage to the original show. The problem is the cheese worked in the original series because the show was made specifically for kids, so they could get away with that. It worked fine, and the kids actually love it. Be like, "Oh, that's such a cool line." This show is made for adults, though. It's specifically made for the adults who were kids 30 years ago. And I don't know if I speak for all the X-Men fans of my generation, but I, for one, if you're going to try to gear it toward me as an adult, I'm way past the cheesiness. So that's another issue I have with the dialogue. And this kind of brings me to my biggest beef with the new show. Because it is made for adults, it pushes the envelope a little bit too much for my own kids to watch it like they do the original series. For instance, Wolverine curses in the first episode, and it's mild, but it's also not something I want my 4-year-old repeating. There's another element in episode 3, Gambit, who's in love with Rogue. He's super jealous of Magneto, and there's this psychic attack on Gambit, and it makes him have this vision of Rogue and Magneto in this very steamy scene. And there's nothing particularly graphic about it, but again, it's not something that I can let my kids watch without me being there, without censoring it, and I certainly can't just turn it on and let them watch on their own like I can with the original show. So as a fan of the original series who enjoys sharing these properties with my kids, it's a little disappointing. And that's my biggest beef with the show. But overall, I'd give it an objective rating of 7 out of 10. Personal enjoyment, I'd probably say 6 out of 10. The 4th episode dropped a bit in quality for me, but I'm still curious to see where the series is going and plan to stick with it for the time being. So if you're a fan of the original show, check it out. And if you're somebody like me who is a stickler for continuity, just try to go into it watching it more as an homage set in its own universe instead of a direct continuation from the original show. And I don't know whether you'll like it, but you'll definitely like it more than you would if you didn't go in like that, I would think. Hope you enjoyed the video. If you did, be sure to subscribe if you haven't already. Consider supporting us on Patreon, and we'll see you soon.